Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Development Control. Exit is located at the rear of the room. Go down the stairs and mobile phones or turn them to silent. Thank you. Explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I'm Chairman of Right and Left, our officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice. He will be considering the published papers, examining and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite clearly and keep points made till the application has finished. Also, all committee members to avoid repetition and that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. So I've got declarations of...
Speaking as a ward councillor, and then we'll rejoin the committee after that.
Anybody else? No? Good. The 7th, could I have a seconder, please? Minutes of the meeting held on the 28th will be for to be dealt with tonight. Item
for technical details, consent for the erection of 2 dwellings. Confirm that Natural England have reviewed the appropriate assessment document and have no objection to it, and that is in respect of the only solution from a legal agreement with on-site resolution to a condition linking the mitigation to east. That meets all of the requirements under an appropriate assessment and can be agreed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. I would like to point out on this that the only, as Greg has said, the only reason this is here is because of the nitrates issue. So when we go to questions and when we go to debate, there is no point in asking questions on anything else other than the nitrates issue, because the application is effectively tonight. If we could have our speakers, Mr. Gerald Dodson and Mr. Richard Wyatt, please. Thank you. If you could introduce yourself, you have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Thank you. Microphone button is in front of you.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Richard Wyatt. I live at 29 St Michael's Close. I'll also be talking on behalf of Gerald Dodson, who lives at Boundary House, and the community of St Michael's Close. We first spoke at the PIP stage, and the councillors expressed frustration that they felt compelled to approve due to process and the failure of the 5-year plan. It was at the TDC stage where the local knowledge demonstrated, to quote the councillor, that water cannot flow uphill, and you rejected that application. The local knowledge, which I firmly believe should be at the heart of all planning decisions, was not heard further up the appeal process, and you felt compelled to approve after your rejection was overturned. When I first looked at this amendment to the plan, I thought that perhaps, as you did, it was a simple clarification of a nitrate solution. I'll remind the councillors that Dave, who lives at number 7, who's lived in St Michael's Close for 20 years, has said that during his time in the Close, the council had to clear the main sewage once or twice a decade. Last year, they had to clear it 3 times. That's in a single year. Raw sewage bubbling up through the garage. When I put forward this point to the councillors last time, you took comfort that there was no additional load placed on the main sewage, as you approved the plan, which clearly stated there will be no connection to the main sewage. The current nitrate plan, number 0.8, no longer has the biobubble SBR treatment plant, and is now stating direct connection to the main sewage for nitrate credits. I would ask councillors to review the impact of this change would have that you've approved in the past in the context of the local knowledge that you now have. Natural England can only comment on the offset schema, not on the impact it will undoubtedly have on an overstretched sewage system. Linked to this, by putting forward this nitrate credit system, it has opened up the rest of the field for further expansion, something which all councillors and yourself, Chair, expressed frustration on last time. And the last nitrogen solution put forward made the rest of the field unviable for further development. So all the members of the community which I have spoken to find this additional threat of further building deeply unsettling and will further blight their homes. As I said at the last meeting, I believe everyone has the right to make money off their investments, but not to the detriment of other people. Approving this nitrate schema nitrate schema, although I'm sure it follows all the rules and processes, is just extending the development opportunities in the field above St Michael's Close. We've talked at length in the past about the flooding issue, which has continued to get worse, but we'll just keep this to the nitrate conversation. I believe local knowledge is very important in situations like this. Expert judgment and standard reports can only get us so far. Coming into this meeting, councillors, you might have been thinking that it's simply approve the nitrate agreement. I hope I've shown you have more agency in that, and there's wider considerations to weigh up. By proposing the use of nitrate credits, this application has far-reaching impact upon our 40-year-old infrastructure within St Michael's Close. It has changed the overall planning consent, in my opinion. Thank you, councillors, for taking the time to listen to my concerns and the concerns of the community.
Thank you, Mr. Wyatt. If you could turn your microphone off because it mutes the others out. Thank you. Questions for Mr. Wyatt? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Wyatt. If we could have, I believe we have Stephen Young. Good evening, Mr. Young. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. As Mr. Chapman has indicated, permission in principle was granted in October of 2019 for a minimum of 2 and maximum of 4 dwellings. The PIP application agreed the principle of residential land use in this location, and an appeal was allowed in May 2021, granting TDC technical details consent for 2 dwellings on site with foul drainage. This remains extant. On the 12th of January, members of this committee resolved to grant TDC for this application on the basis that the proposal would be well related to the surrounding development with no significant impacts on the landscape character. It was agreed that this is a sustainable form of development which would preserve the character and appearance of the adjacent North Waltham conservation area, and that the development would not cause any adverse impact on the highway safety or increase flood risk. The difference between this TDC and the extant scheme is that H1 is slightly larger and has a rectangular footprint as opposed to an L-shaped design. That change was found acceptable by members when resolving to grant the TDC earlier this year. The application, as Mr. Chapman has indicated, is brought back to committee solely due to a change in the nitrate mitigation. In January 2022, members resolved to grant the application on the basis that nitrate would be on land within the applicant's ownership. However, as members may be aware, this council now has a strategic nitrate mitigation scheme in place, which enables applicants in Basingstoke and Deane to purchase credits from Eastleigh. This scheme, together with the agreement between the two councils, has been endorsed by Natural England. It's preferable to the applicant to purchase credits to mitigate the impact downstream as part of a strategic scheme. In my opinion, the off-site strategic scheme is likely to be more effective in the long term at addressing the issues of green algae in the Solent. Condition 21, it requires essentially that no development takes place until confirmation has been submitted that the nitrate credits from Eastleigh have been secured. The applicant is already in discussions with Eastleigh's nitrate officers and intends to purchase the credits as soon as possible once a resolution to approve is published. Once officers have agreed that condition 21 is satisfied, then the intention is to discharge the remaining conditions and to commence development on site. We therefore trust that members will be agreeable to this change in nitrate mitigation and resolve again to approve the TDC. Just to reiterate that this is a procedural alteration to the scheme and compared to that which members found acceptable earlier in this year. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have, although you may be aware that I'm a substitute for Catherine Miles, so my ability to answer some questions may be a little limited.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Questions for Mr. Young? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Wonder whether we, just to help members consider this, that could we have explained to us this strategic scheme that the borough has entered into, as to when we did this, what it is, and therefore what the Eastleigh Borough Council scheme is. Thus are we here tonight to decide whether the original nitrate mitigation on the previous application versus the new system, or is that decision gone because we only have entered into a credit for everything, a credit scheme for everything we will do in the future? Thank you.
I'll try and clarify that for you. The Eastleigh Borough Council scheme is land that primarily they have in country parks that has previously been managed for agricultural purposes. But instead of being managed for agricultural purposes, it will be managed or taken out of agricultural production and managed for such uses as wildflower meadows, thereby reducing the amount of nitrogen that goes into the soil. They've got a large amount of area, so they can break that down and divide it into individual credits. That principle is agreed with Natural England, and as a council, we have signed up to that overarching, with an overarching legal agreement between us and Eastleigh as well, to agree the principle of that is an acceptable way forward, is an acceptable response. The long and short of it is it takes additional nitrate out of the ground, and the developers can buy credits from Eastleigh.
Sorry, just to follow up. So therefore, have we, as this committee, the power to say, no, we don't want the credit scheme to be used in this case, we want the original scheme by refusing the application, or is that decision taken away from us by an agreement that I have to say I'm not aware of until what I'm now reading?
That is in place, but you'd have to have a material reason not to agree to the Eastleigh scheme, whereas our advice, and importantly the advice of Natural England, is that that is an appropriate response to removing nitrate from the Solent.
If I can help, it was an executive decision to enter into the agreement with Eastleigh.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Konechka.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a full-time member of this committee, as you know, so there may be some ignorance built into my question, for which I apologise in advance. One of the speakers mentioned that there was a change to the scheme in that originally the sewage was going to be in a standalone system, and it's now attached to the main sewage system. Is that a change that has happened since this last went to committee, or is that something that the committee has already known about and already approved?
That change is as a result of the amended proposal. The committee report before you has retained the original condition, which requires the development to drain to a biobubble plant, a condition 15 on page 44. If that is members retain the preferred position of draining to a biobubble, which does take additional nitrates out of the system, then I would suggest that the word notwithstanding the submitted details is submitted in front of that condition.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a question on the last statement. Okay, you said that obviously this application is up for approval, connecting to the national or the local sewerage current system in there. But you said that if we refuse it and go back to the original, it will take out more nitrates. Can you then explain why the credit system is more acceptable in this particular case, rather than going for the actual bio bubble, which would remove more nitrates? Surely we'd want more nitrates taken out of the system, not, putting sewage into the local system for a lower amount of credit. I'm confused.
The previous recommendation and the current recommendation both retain condition 15, which requires the sewerage to be disposed of by biobubble. In terms of the two, so that's the first thing, both schemes both require, as a result of the officer assessment, the biobubble drainage. So the proposal is and was for that. There is no proposal on the table from officers for mains sewerage drainage, although that is what the applicant's proposal was. And I was saying, if members are minded, in retrospect, to include the biobubble, then the insertion of notwithstanding the submitted details, I would suggest, is added to condition 15. In terms of the appropriateness of the Eastleigh scheme or the 106 scheme that tied it to the land, the officer's advice is both are acceptable. We had a previous resolution that the previous scheme would be acceptable and would take an appropriate amount of nitrates out of the land, and its officer's advice that the Eastleigh scheme will also do that and can also be accepted. There's no as the officer advises, there's no reason for refusal for taking the Eastleigh scheme and securing it through condition. Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief point of clarification. The gentleman who spoke in favour mentions condition 21. At the bottom of page 66, we have condition 20, and then at the top of page 67, it goes straight to the informatives. Can I just make sure that the condition that he spoke about is actually included somewhere and he's just presumably got the number wrong? Because it's also not on the update paper. So.
Thank you, Chair. If you turn to page 46, that contains the condition 21. I think the condition that you're referring to later in the order paper is that is under Appendix A, which was the 12th of January 2022 Development Control Committee. So the condition 21 on page 46 is the current one. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Frost, second question.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I just want to go back to the point of the nitrates. Okay, this committee was informed, okay, of by officers literally a couple of minutes ago that the biobubble would take out more nitrates, okay, than the Eastleigh scheme. Okay, so why are we going for the Eastleigh scheme and not the biobubble, okay, which would take out more nitrates? I'm confused there.
The proposal on the table from officers is the Eastleigh scheme and the biobubble.
Any more questions? Okay, it's debate. Councillor Harvey.
Just to be clear, Chair, bearing in mind the conversation we've just had, if we're going to do anything with this, I would want that condition enforcing and improving, as the officers say, to secure the biobubble regardless of anything else. So yeah, let's make sure that we've got that absolutely tacked on.
Councillor Konechko.
Yeah, just very quickly say I completely agree with that.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so my understanding is that that condition aside, applying to both existing application and the one in front of us tonight, I am now hearing we can make a decision between which nitrate strategy. So if that is the case, then it would seem that we've got the planting of trees and taking local land versus a system that is credits that go somewhere else. So that's how I understand it. So I assume that's where we are. So my personal feeling now is that I would go for refusal of this application. Thus, we're keeping the acceptance of the previous application with the nitrate mitigation as defined and the bubble as per the thing. So I'm quite happy to propose that as a. I don't know what the grounds are in the sense that its preference of scheme is what I'm hearing is the decision we need to make. Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin, I'm being advised that if you can't give grounds, effectively you can't make the proposal. You've got to give grounds for making that proposal. Based on a planning reason.
Okay, so it's a situation we've not been in before because we've never discussed this nitrate mitigation. So Natural England support both situations. So I can't see a planning reason for accepting it or rejecting it. It is a purely decision of which process you want. The reason I would go for the existing one is its planting of trees, and I think that also has a ecological benefit on the site. So how that fits in with a policy, the biodiversity would be enhanced if we went for left it things as they are and refused this application.
Chair, I don't think Councillor Tomlin has identified what the material planning harm is to this application. And without material planning harm, I can't see how the committee could refuse it.
So sorry, I've left my mic on. Okay, thank you. I accept. I'll withdraw the motion.
Thank you. I see no hands up, so I will propose we accept this motion with the enforcement of the biobubble. My only real concern on this isn't where the biodiversity gain and loss is and where the mitigation is, whether it's here in Hampshire or there in Hampshire, doesn't really concern me. It's being provided. My only concern is to the residents of St Michael's Close, that they don't suffer more flooding issues, more sewage issues than they are doing now. I know North Waltham very well. The other issue that was raised was this opening this up to further housing on this site, and I think we're all aware that that will probably come, but we can't prejudge planning applications that we haven't got. So as I say, I move acceptance subject to enforcement of condition 15 that the biobubble is provided. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Faulkner, you're seconding it. Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval, subject to the conditions as discussed. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 8 or 9, 8. And those against? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. That application is approved. Thank you. Greg. Sorry, there were 2 abstentions. Could you put your hands up? 1, 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could confirm that that application is approved, subject to the amendment to condition 15 to reaffirm that the proposal is for connection to the biobubble and not mains drainage. So they're taking away the proposal for mains drainage that was part of the revised nitrate proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. Item 2, 44 Kenilworth Road. Bethan.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is a full planning application at 44 Kenilworth Road. The proposals for the change of use from a C3 dwelling house to a C4 house of multiple occupancy. The property provides 4 separate rooms. There is an update on pages 3 to 4 of the update paper, just to confirm that the site's not currently being rented out as a house of multiple occupancy, and therefore this is not a retrospective application, and to clarify that the parking survey was carried out by Optrader, which are an organisation that provide traffic and movement surveys across the UK. We also just want to clarify that there's an incorrect reference to 14 unrelated tenants on page 74 of the agenda. This is actually just for 4 separate tenants. And page 78 of the agenda also refers to a communal parking area at the rear, but it's actually at the front. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethan. If we could have our first speaker, Councillor Freeman, please. Councillor Freeman, you will have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much. I would like to object to this planning application. My difference of opinion on the reasons for approval number 3. The reasons for approval here say the development would not cause an adverse impact on highway safety and adequate parking would be provided, so therefore it complies with policy CN9. I think the opposite. It will most definitely have an adverse impact on highway safety. When we went to the site visit on Friday, it was quite clear that there are already quite a number of cars in there. It's visible along Kenilworth Road where cars are parked on the verges and on the roads. It's to add an additional between 4 and 8 cars. If you have a couple in each room, 4 cars to 8 cars, that it's not going to sustain it. The only parking that is there is that small area that the viewing panel saw on Friday. It cannot cope with that many cars and an influx. It's also that I'm also like to object on the fact that every other house in that little square there is a family home. To put in a house of multiple occupancy there, it's not in keeping with the area. Like I say, it will add so much pressure to the parking, which Kenilworth Road is arguably the worst road in Winklebury for parking issues. There's very, very limited parking, and to stick a HMO in there, really, in my opinion, it will cause an impact. It will have issues for emergency service vehicle access, etc. Yeah. I would hope that this application be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Freeman? No? Thank you. And I will have to ask you to leave the room for the rest of the application. Somebody will come and get you. Thank you. Questions to officers? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, forgive me for raising this in terms of the survey, but Obtrada, who did the survey, am I right in saying they are employed by the applicant to do the survey?
Yes, they were employed by the applicant.
Any more questions? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Condition 3, it says provision for the parking of 4 vehicles shall be maintained within the parking areas shown in the parking maps submitted. How are we going to do that and how are we going to monitor it? Because it appears to be no allocated parking, it's just parking spaces.
So the surveys that they provided show that they're throughout from between 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. If you get the next 2 up, show that there's provision for 4 cars available throughout the time. So I think that's what we're referring to there on that.
If I could just add to that, Chairman, I think Councillor Tomlin is quite correct in terms of meeting the tests for enforcement, that condition wouldn't be able to be enforceable by our enforcement officers, given that 4 spaces could be available at any point, as shown by the parking survey, anywhere on the highway. So I would suggest that condition, if members are minded to recommend approval, can be removed given the availability of parking within the vicinity. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Rattigan.
Greg, can I just confirm that provision is not allocation and therefore there will be a free-for-all for parking spaces in that small square?
Correct. It's just worth pointing out that that's the current situation, and the current number of bedrooms requires 3 parking spaces, so it's only an additional 1 parking space that we're considering here.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Under the parking section on page 78, it mentions that the situation was observed between the hours of 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. over 2 days. Do we know which 2 days of the week that was taken
Yeah,
on?
so we've got Friday, and we also have a Sunday, so to cover weekends and weekdays.
Any more questions? In that case, debate. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I find this parking debate fascinating because we're talking about parking on land that we don't own, that is owned privately by Vivid Housing Association. And we're talking about a HMO that is seeking to impose its burden of parking on their land. Beyond that, they're looking to park on the highway on a bend on Kenilworth Road, which I know and many members will know very well, I'm sure. Unless these HMOs, in my opinion, can actually satisfy the SPD and satisfy the policy, which says that they have to account and actually consume their own smoke when it comes to parking, then we face the difficulty of creating more problems in these communities and in these locations. And I know that well from my own ward, let alone from Winklebury. So my immediate starting point in considering the application is not just the fact there are 4 cars as allocated as per the space, but also the reality of operating a HMO with 4 potential households in it. It ain't just going to be 4 cars, it's going to be a lot more than that. And there ain't a HMO I know of in Basingstoke that doesn't do that, particularly if you have a couple living in one of those bedrooms. It could well be 2 cars. Now, admittedly, our policy standards doesn't account for that. We could only go on policy. But the policy says they have to consume their own smoke. And I cannot see, based upon what is proposed in front of us, on the highway that is unallocated, that it is safe. And in the context of the community, it is appropriate, to be honest with you. That aside, EM10 and the character of the community is worth considering in the sense that this community does not have an overspill of HMOs. It is family housing, and thus the creation of a HMO would change the character of this particular community. And that is a weaker argument, I accept, but it is one nonetheless. So at the moment, I am concerned about the parking. I do not believe the paid-for consultants of the applicant in the way they've gone about it. And in that sense, I would like to have seen something more objective. I also note the applicant isn't even here this evening to defend their application. So we're left to try to understand the situation without their assistance. Thank you to our officers for the work they do in that regard, because they're the only ones we can rely on tonight. So in that respect, those are my 2 concerns. And at the moment, listening to the debate, and I'll take my decision whether I want to move something in a moment, a little later.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I am concerned about the change of character in an area. I mean, we've got family homes there now, although, you know, I accept that HMOs are part of our planning world now. I think it is right that we scrutinise every single one of these HMOs, for the impact of groups of people who are not always connected to an area, and the fact that HMOs have a habit of being transient. And let's just be honest about it, the HMOs, because of the way they are for people who are deciding whether they want to live or work in Basingstoke on the longer term, making that decision before they go into perhaps more secure accommodation. And I do think this application would change that. I am also naturally worried about the parking, the fact that we can't have parking free-for-alls within this borough. It leads to violence, it leads to neighbourhood disputes, and leads to a sense that we're not all in it together. And I think the reality that we are finding with HMOs is that people feel reticent to challenge any of those individuals because they're not going to be there for a long time. And therefore, although I accept the reasons for refusal seem robust, in actual fact, reason 3 disappears in my view, and reason 4 could be turned around in my view to the change of character of the area. So I can't support the officer's recommendation as it sits.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, adding on this, it's noted in the report that bedroom 4 is undersized. Not just, one of them's very close to it, but bedroom 4 is undersized. So I would add that the reason for approval number 1 is in question, as in it doesn't meet our design and sustainability supplementary planning document. Thus, the M10 kicks in as well as delivering high quality development in that respect. So, thank you.
Anyone else like to contribute or make a proposal? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to put, you know, into the public domain that I have to say I think I approve almost of everything that Councillor Harvey has said and Councillor Rattigan has said. So, you know, I'm just to keep things brief, okay, I don't want to repeat anything, but I'm struggling to see an approval for this, this application.
Thank you. We've had quite a lot of opinions. The one thing we're lacking at the moment is a motion. So if somebody would like, Councillor Harvey, thank you.
I would personally propose refusal on the grounds of the reversal of approval 3 and 2. I think the issue of EM10 and amenity is one to bear in mind on the character of the area, and 3 relates specifically to the parking and impact on highway safety. And I have concern about that. So I would go on 3, accepting that 2 is also relevant.
Chair, if I could just, was it reason for approval 1 and 3 turned to reasons for refusal rather than 2? 2 talks about external appearance of the property and there aren't any changes to the external appearance. 1 is... Well, that's because obviously there was, Councillor Tomlin mentioned number 1 and the inadequacy of the inside space. And then in terms of reason for approval 3, turning that into reverse, from the debate I've listened to and from what you've just said in terms of EM10, I would suggest in terms of, if members are minded to vote that way, in terms of reversing that reason for approval to turn into reason for refusal, that there is also reference to character and amenity, and also policy EM10, our parking SPD and the design of sustainability SPD.
Just picking up on that, colleagues are indicating 3 and 4 in terms of your conditions. Reversing them would be more appropriate. So if you feel that, I'd be happy to do that if that works better.
Thank you. It's been proposed for refusal. Seconder, Councillor Frost. Thank you. Moved and seconded for refusal with the reasons given. Those in favour of refusal. And that is unanimous. Thank you. That is refused. And Bethan.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just confirm that application is refused for reasons of insufficient living space, the impact as a result of insufficient parking within the vicinity with additions to what was reason for approval 3 turned to reason for refusal, adding policy EM10 to CN9 and also the parking SPD and the design and sustainability SPD, and also the impact on privacy and amenity. Again, the reverse of reason for approval 4 into a reason for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. Right, item 3, Horsebrook, Bear Hill, Kingsclear. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the formation of a new access. There is a very short update which makes reference to the viewing panel that was held at the site. Other than that, there's no further update. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. Thank you for your talking to me earlier. It is brought to committee by myself, although I'm not predetermined on it. We always have to make your referral to the DC committee on the basis of what the officer's written in, and therefore it's difficult not to seem that you're already swayed one way or another. But I can assure you, having spoken to a number of neighbours and taken on their views, I can genuinely say that I'm not predetermined on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. If we could have our first speaker, which is Councillor Mussett. Good evening, Councillor Mussett. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Clive Mussett and I'm Chair of Kingsclere Parish Council and speak to you in that capacity. Thank you for the speaking slot. So the application from Kingsclere Parish Council's perspective is straightforward, and the application requires another driveway in a sensitive protected area, despite a widened one already having been approved in applications in 2015 and 2017, and I quote from those, to accommodate 2 dwellings and landscaping, and also in 2017 shared access for both properties. Horsebrook and the neighbouring property Henlow are within the conservation area. The neighbourhood plan, which is a democratically determined adopted policy of both the parish and the borough council, include policies to protect that conservation area. The various reports from your council officers set out the planning objections, in our opinion, perfectly correctly, and the parish council's position hasn't changed in over a year. The parish council set out its last objection last year as appropriately consulted, as I say, a position that remains unchanged. In a relatively short period of time, an important street scene within our conservation area has been allowed to degrade and urbanise as per the photographs which we were advised by officers to distribute to the borough councillors a number of weeks ago. You will, on your site visit, no doubt have seen the state of the existing widened bank and the removal of existing tree hedging and its replacement with non-native laurel. We are not talking here about, our position is that we wish you to refuse this application and support your planning officers.
Thank you. Councillor Mussett, if you could turn your microphone off, thank you. Questions for the councillor? I have one. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the viewing panel. The existing access arrangement, from what I can see on the diagrams in front of me, appears to exit onto a junction.
I'm not a safety officer, and as you probably know, I don't work for Hampshire Highways. What I can say is that has been the existing driveway. The applicant chose to widen on the grounds of improving access, one of which was a safety aspect for both properties. So if that's now deemed unsafe by an expert, then I question therefore why it was ever deemed appropriate to widen in the first place.
Okay. So that's the access as it is at the moment. In your local knowledge, has that access caused any problems over the last few years?
Not that I'm aware of. It's not any more inappropriate than any other access of a similar nature in a semi-rural, small-town village. So not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Any more questions? No, thank you very much. And if we could have Mr. Castelli, please. Good evening, Mr. Castelli. You will have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Could you put the microphone on, please?
Good evening, thank you. One thing what Clive said was interesting. The house before we brought it was an old lady who never had a car. When we adapted the house next door, we did extend the driveway. We probably thought it was a good idea at the time, but the reason being it is right on the junction, and there's been numerous near knocks. My neighbours had a knock already because you come out with cars coming from Symington hard on the left-hand side. That's the problem. It's not a problem on the right. It's the cars coming from the left. They come from Symington and take the corner off. So we do access generally from the top. We don't come from the bottom. So putting the driveway 30, 40 foot down, we thought would be fantastic. Come in the top, exit through the middle, so you can see both ways up and down the road. What else was we? Yes, regarding the visual effect, like with Clive, we are going to shrink that driveway back to half the size. It was kind of pointless. The reason we've not finished it, because we've been trying to get a second entrance now for the last, I don't know, year and a half. I don't think on the road going up it's going to cause any visual effect because, like I said, we're going to shrink the original one, probably half the size. The new one's not going to be as big, you know, the same sort of size, not big as it is now, and we are going to finish in some native hedging, hornbeam or something on those lines. So I think actually it will look prettier, well definitely prettier than what it is now, but yeah. So yeah, that's most of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could turn the microphone off, please. Questions for the speaker? No. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Costello. Thank you very much for coming in and speaking to the committee. I'm seeking a bit of clarification about what you were talking about, because I'm confused. Either the existing site entrance is either safe or it's not safe. Okay, so just hold on. Okay, so and if it's not safe, okay, why aren't you reconstituting the bank? Okay, planting native trees instead of the laurels, and then maybe consider the new exit, okay, for being an ingress and an egress out onto the lane, onto Bear Hill. Correct. Well, not board up, okay, but actually reconstitute.
Sorry, we do need to use the microphone, so if you can wait until Councillor Frost has finished asking his question, and then give your answer with the microphone.
I'll be very quick. Okay, so I'm just a little confused on that. Okay, and I hope you can clarify matters for me.
So you're asking why we don't take out back to what it was normally? Yeah. We haven't really thought about that. We thought an in and out drive would be much more appropriate.
Any more questions for Mr. Castelli? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Castelli. Questions to officers? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Can officers just clarify exactly what Hampshire County Council Highways have actually said about the traffic displays of the current entrance exit, okay, and whether that is actually dangerous? Thank you.
Hampshire County Council, in terms of this current proposal, have no objections to it, subject to the conditions that are in your order paper.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Frost, second question.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll use my second question here. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to ask officers, what has the biodiversity officer said about the fact that there are non-native, okay, trees that are planted on the chalk bank?
The biodiversity officer hasn't been consulted on the application. The presence of the laurel hedge is already there. That isn't part of the proposal. The proposal is to take out a section of the laurel hedge.
Councillor Rattigan.
Greg, is it possible that we could, if we were to pass this, demand a condition that we have natural hedging on that rather than laurel? It seems to be some issue for some people.
It would be unreasonable to require that the whole of the hedgerow along the frontage was taken out and replaced, because it's not related to the development. What could be required is that the section of hedgerow that is removed. If you turn to page 93, it refers to removing existing hedge in respect of where the visibility splays are and planting behind the visibility splays. So there could be a condition imposed that requires where hedgerow is taken out and replanted, that replanting work is native hedgerow.
I see no more questions to officers, in which case debate. Councillor Faulkner, followed by Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I have the advantage, I suppose, in that I use this road considerably. It is, in fact, the unofficial bypass for Basingstoke to the south side of Newbury to avoid the A339, so there's a considerable amount of traffic. I'm not convinced that another entrance would do anything for safety, because the way the traffic works is you'll see traffic coming downhill be in this lane on the right as opposed to the entrance here on the left. And the traffic coming up the hill, the visibility is better there than it would be if you had an additional access further down. So I'm not convinced that this would add to safety, and therefore I see no reason not to accept either the officer's recommendation and the view of the parish council.
Councillor Faulkner, is that a proposal? Or?
I would propose to accept the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a proposal. Is there a seconder for it? Councillor Court. I've got 3 other speakers listed. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. With the proposal that's already been made, I'll withdraw my comment.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, I was quite happy to second the motion, the officer approval. I just think if we actually look at this, okay, I know that it looks relatively safe, but if the junction, the current existing junction is unsafe, okay, then why are we keeping it open? Okay, and if we move the existing or the ingress or egress, okay, 50 metres or so down the actual path or down the road there, okay, then effectively what we're doing is scrubbing out more, okay, of the hedge and reducing the hedging for for the splays. So we're almost giving carte blanche for the whole thing to be grubbed out, okay, and it won't be respecting the in my opinion, the character of Bear Hill. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. As per the officer recommendation, those in favour of refusal? Sorry, I didn't realise there was... Sorry, Councillor Rattigan. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to stop the proceedings so quickly. If we look at what the officer has used for his reasons for refusal, it is causing harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. Now, that would be subjective, frankly, and it's even more subjective, if I'm honest, because the officer involved, unfortunately, has done all of this from Northern Ireland and has not had the benefit of, as we have, at least a view on the site. Now, it's about the impact on the conservation area. We all know, or those who live in or close to the village know, that the conservation area is sacrosanct. But most of us would see that from the church along Swan Street. There are no views from Bear Hill into the AONB. Let's just make that point very clear. I can understand that this is a chalk bank, and that is important. But we have heard from the applicant that he is proposing to reduce the size at the top. I hope by the same size he's going to make the cut in the middle. I can't tell from the drawings. There is, in my view, a public safety issue, and there's no objections to this from the highways. Councillor Faulkner is right. It is a well-used road. But we were there on Friday, and I make this point that isn't here, is that we had our bus reverse out of there and nearly come into collision with two separate cars. Now that is a real fact. The fact that this bank hides two not very pretty houses, in my view, unlike our MP who thought they were gorgeous until he realised he couldn't get votes out of them because they were from Holland and they are unlikely to vote in a parliamentary election. But that said, he did try his best. I have to say, it is about the safety issues, and is another cut in there so substantive that it causes substantial harm. But as is said here in the officer's report, such harm would be within the less than substantial category. Now, in my view, that is a subjective determination from the officer. So I am asking you to review what you might have voted on.
Would improve the safety of that junction, because I think that would help a lot of the councillors here make the decision. I know we have a different motion on the table though, so if members are minded, we could refuse the motion that's on the table and potentially move to deferral if officers and Anne believe that's possible.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table which has been seconded. A motion was made by Councillor Faulkner. Are you happy for that motion to stand, Councillor Faulkner?
Yes.
Thank you. In that case, we will vote on it. Motion was refusal as per...
Just a point of order, please, Chair. Okay, Councillor Rattigan did actually say that I'd seconded it, but it was actually Councillor Court, okay, that seconded it, and I just wanted to make that clear.
Appreciate that.
For the record. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table which is seconded for refusal as per the officer's recommendations. Those in favour of refusal? 6. I mean, that's it. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the casting vote is that he is refused. Thank you.
Thank you,
Greg,
Chairman.
yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could confirm that the application is refused in accordance with the officer recommendation in the order paper. Thank you, Chair.
Item number 4, land at rear of 9 the Close, Kiln Lane, Monk, Sherborne. Officer to introduce.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an application for full planning permission at 9 the Close, Kiln Lane, Monk, Sherborne. The proposal is for the erection of one single-storey dwelling with new access, parking and private garden to be provided. There is no update since the preparation of the agenda, and the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions located at the end of the report on pages 110 to 113 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethan. If we could have our first speaker, which is Mr. Perkins. Good evening, Mr. Perkins. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Microphone button is on the deck in front of you. Could you put your microphone on? It will light up red when it's live.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. Evening, my name is Rob Perkins. I live at Flaxbourne, which is located in the conservation area of Monk Sherborne, and backs onto the, you can see there, backs onto the land in question. I did not actually receive a formal notification of this application, which I believe was an oversight, and actually my neighbour at Kiln House also didn't receive that application, and she also objects to this this proposal. She's not here, can't be here tonight. Firstly, I'd like to say that I think there's been no material change to the previously refused application made, I think it was back in 2016. There may have been some small modifications, but the fundamental reasons that the application was refused before have not actually changed. I'm going to start with the access to the new property. The updated application is a bit misleading because it states that it has permission for the new access point onto Kiln Lane. However, it doesn't actually have permission yet. It may only get permission if a number of criteria and safety conditions are met. And meeting these conditions for the access will have an impact on the pedestrian use of this stretch of road, which is a very popular walking route in the village, and it connects two well-used and historic footpaths. But the bottom line of this application is that it's not in keeping with the appearance and the density of the surrounding area. For appearance, the plot in question sits on land around 5 or 6 feet, I'd say, higher than the gardens of both my house and Kiln House. So effectively, the ground floor of the new property would overlook these gardens, and therefore have an impact on the conservation area it sits next to. I believe the height difference wasn't actually mentioned in the application. But for density, the plot in question has been created by halving the size of the back gardens of number 8 and number 9 are close. This leaves the back gardens of these two properties approximately equal to the footprint of the actual dwelling itself, and the garden of the new property has a garden of a similar tiny proportions. I was looking at the conservation area map of the village. It shows all the boundaries of the houses in the village, and this proposal is not in keeping with most of the other houses in the close itself that it sits in, and certainly not in keeping with a typical Hampshire village like Monk Sherborne. So finally, I'd like to say that Monk Sherborne has no public transport or shops, and therefore this is not a priority area for increasing population density. So I believe we should only be approving applications that are appropriate to the area that they fit in. And so I'd urge you to reject this application for the reasons I've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could turn your microphone off, please. Questions for the speaker? No? Thank you very much. Mr. Cotterill. Evening, Mr. Cotterill. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, good evening, Chair. As you've just heard, with this application, there are actually a number of differences between the previous scheme and the new one. The footprint has been reduced. There was a detached garage that's been removed from the new scheme. And that all linked together obviously reduces the overall built form on that site. We've also just heard there in terms of the extent permission, in terms of the lawful development certificates. I'm not aware of any conditions with regards to the access, so I believe that there are no conditions on that, but we'll confirm that at some point. In terms of what can actually be done there, obviously the lawful development certificates are in place, so that is the fallback position. Whether the objector that you've just heard actually received letters in terms of that, from a lawful point of view, you wouldn't do, because it's in terms of law, it's not neighbour consultation. In terms of the current application, again, obviously, I don't work for the LPA, so I can't comment in terms of whether he's actually received letters or not. But what I will say is, obviously, the site notices are put up, which are there to inform the local area in terms of what's actually been going on. Again, in terms of the officer's report, again, it's a good report that covers all the main points from my point of view. And I'd just like to obviously say that, from a actual consultee point of view, the application has no objections in terms of highways, trees, biodiversity, and it was deemed by the officers to not have any impact on the surrounding properties. Those surrounding properties, in terms of talking about the sizes of the gardens and the bits that are there, in the blue drawing that was just on the screen, they're all bungalows, and the gardens were deemed by the officers to be suitable under the SPDs. So therefore it does meet the requirements. Lastly, dare I say it, paragraph 11, MPPF, in terms of the benefits, do that outweigh the harm identified? Well, given that in terms of the officer's point of view, there are no harms in terms of identified, therefore I'd ask that you just approve this application in line with the MPPF and the local plan. Lastly, I'd just like to say, obviously, I agree to the suggested planning conditions. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cotterill. Questions? No, I have no questions. Thank you very much. Councillor McIntyre. Good evening, Councillor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Mr Chair, councillors. Can we put the photo up, please, to the view going along the south? That one there. If we freeze it on that, please, thank you. The site at Kilton Lane has a history within Monk Sherborne and is known both to myself and my predecessor, having previously been dismissed by our planning department and rejected at appeal before the planning inspectorate 6 years previously. That application was rejected due to the effect of the proposed development on the character and appearance of the area. Policy SS6E of our local plan is quite clear. Small-scale development proposals for new housing outside of settlement policy boundaries will only be permitted where it can be demonstrated that it would meet a local need as agreed in consultation with the parish town council. The parish council's response to any consultation is noted on page 97 of the pack before you. The recommendation is for the application to be refused. Our planning officer himself even reports that the proposed development fails SS1 and SS6 of our local plan. That's on page 100 and 101 of the report before you. Kilton Lane is adopted as part of the historic St James's Way, retracing the route taken by medieval pilgrims in Britain on their way to Santiago de Compostela. I won't say that again. The Camino de Santiago. This route joins Hampshire County Council footpaths to the north and south of Kilton Lane and holds clear historical and religious significance within the UK and is clearly defined by both the British Pilgrimage Trust and the Co-Fraternity of St James. I won't say that with a drink. The Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act 1990 sets out the statutory approach to the management of historic buildings and areas and requires special regard to be given to the desirability of preserving any features of architectural or historical interest and its setting. Section 72 of that Act, relating to conservation areas in particular, requires that special attention shall be paid to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of that area. The National Planning Policy Frameworks, Annex 2 Glossary, defines the setting of a heritage area as the surroundings in which a heritage asset is experienced. Its extent is not fixed and may change as the asset and its surroundings evolve. Elements of a setting may make a positive or negative contribution to the significance of an asset and may affect the ability to appreciate that significance or may be neutral. The application site is sited on the boundary of the Monk Sherborne Conservation Area and, if allowed to go ahead, would have a negative impact on character, setting and views into this conservation area from this historical route that you can see in front of you there. The harm to this heritage asset from the proposed development would override the presumption in favour of sustainable development as per footnote 7 of paragraph 11 of the NPPF. Paragraph 170 of the NPPF is quite clear. Decisions should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment by protecting and enhancing valued landscapes.
You have 1 minute remaining.
If granted, this development would only result in degradation of the scenic quality of this historically significant and rural setting. There are several factors which come into play here. From the guidelines for landscape and visual impact assessment, the questions you need to ask yourself: is the landscape associated with particular people, such as artists or writers or events in history that contribute to perceptions of the area? We've already answered that. Religious or not, it does have significance to these chapters. Scenic quality: to what extent does landscape appeal to the senses, primarily but not limited to the visual senses? You can see that yourself clearly there. And then finally, conservation interests. Are there ecology, heritage, geological or archaeological features which are of particular interest? I've covered that in my submission before. I ask committee members to respect the spirit of our local plan, respect the wishes of the residents of Monk Sherborne, protect the scenic quality of the area, protect this rare asset and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor McIntyre? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McIntyre, thank you very much for coming in and speaking to the committee. Okay, I suppose point of clarification, really. Okay, you mentioned a planning appeal, okay, regarding that, and could you please just elucidate very quickly and why that appeal was different to this application?
Thank you, Councillor Frost.
Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Frost, I think that's a question for officers rather than a question for the councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I will ask it to officers. If you can just put it on record, please. Thank you.
Any questions for Councillor McIntyre? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Question as before.
Yeah, okay, so there's several differences between this and the dismissed appeal in 2016 by the time it was appealed. The appeal decision came out. So first of all is the site measurements. So the dismissed appeal, the site area was approximately 450 square metres. The current site area is now 510, so the site area has increased. In addition to that, the built footprint of the dismissed appeal was 110 square metres, whereas now the built footprint is now 85. So as cumulatively is significantly reduced and increased the spaciousness of the site to that was dismissed at appeal. Oh, and also we had a 5-year housing land supply at that point, which we don't at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping officers can give me some figures specifically relating to a point raised by Mr. Perkins earlier. He said that the size of the gardens for number 8 and number 9 had been essentially halved, and that the remaining space for the garden for this new application is also smaller than that of properties in the surrounding areas. The previous picture might display what I'm talking about best. Yeah, that one. Looking at that, it looks like the garden remaining for number 8 is maybe 1.2 times the footprint of the house, which I don't know, we probably have minimum figures, but that seems like quite a small garden in relation to the size of the property. I'm wondering if you have specific dimensions for the size of the garden area for the proposed development and or for number 8 and number 9, just to give us an idea of how much amenity space future residents of those various properties might be able to enjoy.
Thank you, Chairman. We're just in the process of measuring that for you.
Whilst they're doing that, are there any other questions? Councillor Tomley.
Thank you, Chair. To do with conditions, maybe I'm missing something, but can we or should we be adding a condition about materials and what the actual colour of the building, such that it's sensitive to the location, should we grant permission? Also note, condition 13 is removal of permitted development rights.
There is a condition on there. It's later on, where, unlike our normal report, so it's actually condition 7. So no development past damp-proof course should take place until colours of external materials. Yeah, it's later than our other ones normally. And then in response to Councillor Howard Sorrell, the garden for number 8 is 9.8 metres in depth, so just under the 10 metres, which wouldn't substantiate refusal, and it's 8.5 metres in width. So that's totalling almost 80 square metres, so it meets our SPD.
Any more questions for officers? No? Debate. Councillor Attigan.
Thank you, Chair. I was fortunate enough to go on the viewing panel, and I have to say, it looked to me, although I understand the concerns of the conservation area, it did look to me as though it was going to be well screened from Kiln House. It seemed in keeping with the smaller housing that are around, and meets our CN3 requirement to have smaller homes. And of course, it is a bungalow. Let's just be honest, there are not enough bungalows in this borough. And to say, in my view, that this house is not as substantive, or the garden's not as substantive as the rest of the community, sort of smacks a little bit of housing apartheid, frankly. People need to have a choice of provision of their homes, and I think smaller housing, perhaps because people are getting old in their houses and won't move, this is an ideal opportunity for us to find a house that's required. I'm sure it will be snapped up quite quickly, and I don't genuinely believe it will have a detrimental effect on the conservation area. So I'm happy to move officers' recommendation.
Thank you. Been moved for approval. Councillor Howard Sorrell, are you seconding it? Thank you. Okay, moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And I'll make that everyone except one. And those against? And Councillor Court, are you abstaining?
You voted.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand. Thank you. In that case, that is approved. Greg.
Thank you. So the application is approved, subject to conditions listed on pages 110 to 113 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. It is 5 to 8. I think we'll have a 5-minute comfort break. We will reconvene at 8 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. Right, item number 5, land at Hilltop, Chinham Lane, Sherborne St John. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a short written update that is to correct that there were 2 condition 17s in the officer report, and therefore the last condition 17 should be changed to condition 18, but in actual fact that was already picked up in your printed agenda, so it should be correct in the printed agendas before you. There is also a very short verbal update that there's one further objection received in writing that raises objections in respect of the highway movements associated with the proposed development, and that is assessed within the order paper, and the objections already received and the response to those within the order paper. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. If we could have our first speakers, which is Mr Nicoletts and Mr Short, please. Good evening to you both. You have 4 minutes between you. How you use that is entirely up to you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Microphone buttons are in front of you. Thank you.
On behalf of the residents of Sherborne Road, I shall detail some of our concerns. All of the properties in the road rely on septic tanks for waste drainage. The neighbourhood plan advised that the impact on the environment and water quality and the ability of infrastructure and water supply to cope should be considered for new housing developments. It also advised that the SSJ treatment works was close to capacity and was not suitable for modernisation. The developer has not been clear on how foul sewage will be disposed of. The impact on the quality of drinking water for existing properties that have a borehole has not been considered. There is also no evidence from the developer to show the impact the additional soakaways would have on the aquifer, which also supplies the hospital. Chinham Lane already frequently floods from surface water runoff in this area, causing a hazard. There are no footpaths, cycle lanes or bus routes linking us to the nearest settlements. Chinham Lane is a busy 60-mile-per-hour road with lots of bends making it unsafe to walk along. There is also no street lighting. The nearest bus stop is 0.6 miles away, shop 1 mile and schools over half a mile away. The road is only safely accessible via vehicle and therefore breaches the core principles of the National Planning Policy regarding the promotion of public transport. The site should therefore be classed as remote and away from local amenities. Provision of parking spaces is a serious concern as only an average of 2 off-road spaces are provided for each property. This does not make provision for any visitor parking, meaning they will park on the road. The Basingstoke and Dean Parking Supplementary Planning document recommends a carriageway width of at least 5 metres should be provided to allow 1 service vehicle to pass parked vehicles. Sherborne Road has an average width of 4.6 metres. There are no passing points, and so 2 average-sized cars have difficulty passing each other. Sherborne Road is the emergency access gate for Everest College. Access for emergency vehicles, HGVs delivering to Bodbury fencing, carer visits for our elderly neighbour, and residents will be impacted by vehicles parked on the road. SSJ residents have frequently reported missed refuse collections in roads where access has been blocked. Every property in the road relies upon the internet for work, study, or in the case of our bedbound neighbour, for their connection to the outside world. The service provisioning to this road is already severely substandard. We get 7 megabits and have no access to a suitable fibre service. The national average is 20 megabits. Additional housing would only increase the contention ratio and diminish the service further.
Hello. My wife and I have lived in Basingstoke all our lives. We moved into Sherborne Road because after decades of saving and months of looking for a house, we looked for something we could stay for the rest of our lives. We chose this house because of the location, a place for the whole family to visit, stay and enjoy. This development, if approved, will destroy that dream. It will destroy our family life there and the dreams of our children, so please don't approve this. Sherborne St John has put a lot of effort and resident consultation time into creating a local plan in accordance with your planning process.
You have 1 minute remaining.
One that supports Basingstoke's housing needs, and we've exceeded our quota. Building in the strategic gap is not part of that plan. Our plan maintains the integrity of the village. The gap is so important to our small village community. We have no street lighting, we have no footpaths, no public transport, no connections to waste water disposal, but that's the way we like it. But what we do have is foxes and badgers and pheasants and deer. They all come into our garden. manner of life in the street. Our children and grandchildren love these experiences as they don't get that anywhere else in the town that they live. If you approve these 3 bungalows, you will send a clear message that the strategic gap and the village community of Sherman St John are not important. So please refuse this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the speakers? No? Thank you very much. If you could turn that microphone off as you... Thank you. Can we have Mr. Matt Taylor, please? Good evening, Mr. Taylor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. As I hope you agree, this is a very sympathetic proposal comprising only 3 small bungalows. This is a very in-demand type of accommodation, given the ageing population, but a type of dwelling that you'll be aware is all too regularly not constructed these days. As such, the proposal contributes to quite an obvious housing need, particularly for a village such as this. It is clear that the proposal would be acceptable in terms of design, amenity and highways implications. The proposed bungalows would clearly not materially affect any residents directly. It should be noted that this used to actually be the main road that it's located on, but it's since been closed off and is now a very quiet dead end. In terms of material planning considerations, the main consideration is clearly the designation of the strategic gap. The purpose of this designation is to prevent the coalescence of the village and Basingstoke. You'll be aware that policy EM2 is the most relevant, and it's important to note this policy does not preclude development outright. It actually allows for development, provided it would not diminish the separation between the settlements. In this respect, it's crucial to appreciate that these 3 dwellings would infill a gap within an established row of houses. This is clearly illustrated by the figure ground drawing within section 9 of the submitted planning design and access statement. It is beyond doubt, in my view, that these 3 bungalows would not materially alter the strategic gap and certainly would not compromise the wider purpose and its wider strategic integrity. As members will be aware, the council do not have 5-year housing land supply, and in these circumstances, the neighbourhood plan policies must respectfully also be considered out of date with regard to housing. In short, the parish council need to consider providing alternative sites to deliver more housing for the village. This point was clarified by Ward Councillor Tristan Robinson when I attended the parish council meeting. It was important to note that the application site was also shortlisted as one of the potential allocations when the neighbourhood plan was first created. So it follows there really that given additional housing need is now required, it would surely be very high on the list of an alternative site. I must also highlight that at that meeting, both parish councillors and some members of the public voiced their preference to deliver a smaller number of houses on a larger number of sites rather than delivering one larger site for many houses. In this respect, the objection from the parish was slightly contradictory at the meeting and a little bit confusing. Perhaps it was not understood that the 3 houses would contribute towards the parish council's housing requirements, even though it was delivered as delivered as a windfall rather than an allocation. I believe this could not be a more sensitive proposal in terms of housing development. Due to the topography of the landscape, the retained hedgerows and the new hedge planting, these bungalows would not be readily visible from the public highway nor any vantage points. Regardless, they would fit quite neatly in line with the existing homes and would not appear overly noticeable or unexpected in any way along either highway. The development would result in over £60,000 worth of seal payments. Of these, the parish council would be entitled to 25%, of course.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The money can, of course, be spent by the council or the parish council to contribute towards any desired improvements. This could, for instance, include the provision of fibre optic broadband, which is clearly a key desire for the residents in the parish council. I should note that the owner who lives there has no problem with his internet connection. Realistically, 3 more households, I don't believe, would materially change that, but nonetheless, there is some funds there. Finally, given the nature of the site, we have an ideal opportunity to supply homes using solar PV and ground source heat pumps, given the size of the land. Coupled with water efficient systems, I believe this will be a sustainable and future-proof development that does not rely on fossil fuels. In summary, I think this is a low-key, sympathetic and sustainable development comprising only 3 bungalows which would not have any clear adverse impacts. I therefore respectfully ask that members support the officer's recommendation to approve. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Taylor? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. And if we could have Councillor McIntyre, please. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Can you flick through to the start of the photos again, please? Thank you. Good evening again, councillors and Chair. Hilltop itself is an area outside the settlement boundary of Sherburn St John and is physically isolated from the facilities within the village by a distance of over 1 kilometre, having no footpaths or safe pedestrian access. This proposal would introduce an inappropriate development which is urban in character into a predominantly rural countryside location. Policy SS6 of our local plan is quite clear. Development proposals for new housing outside of settlement policy boundaries will only be permitted where they do not result in an isolated form of development, and even then it must be demonstrated that it would meet a local need as agreed in consultation with the Parish Town Council. That's paragraph 4.77, page 66 of our local plan. Well, you have the Parish Council's response on page 119 and 120 of the pack in front of you. The Parish Council objects to this planning application. Furthermore, the proposed development is within the strategic gap preventing coalescence between Basingstoke and the village of Sherburn St John. The photos that you see, if somebody can flick through to the photos please, are that strategic gap. If I may remind councillors of what our local plan says about the strategic gap, the council and local community attach great importance to the function of these areas as a means of maintaining individual settlement identity. I must strongly disagree with the previous assertion that this development does not physically erode the gap. It is entirely inconsistent with what we see on paper as part of the application. A row of properties, including hard surface drives and parking areas, close boarded fence boundaries, as well as the built form, would have an urbanising impact to the detriment of the surrounding landscape character. The Sherburn St John neighbourhood plan was made by Basingstoke and Deane in December 2019, meaning all policies continue to afford full weight. Policy SSJ2 of that plan confirms that new homes will only be permitted where they conserve the rural character of the parish. Again, I refer committee back to our local plan. A key approach of the local plan is for local communities to manage their environment through the provision of neighbourhood plans and orders, including community right to build orders. Neighbourhood plans, where proposed, will set out where housing will be developed in addition to other forms of development to meet local needs. This development urbanises the rural setting by infilling areas of green space. Indeed, approval of this application would surely paint precedent for further development of the hilltop land. And it's interesting that the previous speaker made mention of the site being put forward for Sheila. Because that proposal was soundly rejected at the time when the good residents of Sherburn St John were coming together to produce their neighbourhood plan. If we want to talk numbers, out of the 1,654 votes, only 4 votes were received for Hilltop as their choice.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Any development on Hilltop will not be popular with residents. I had the pleasure of coming in this evening to be met by my residents outside the council, protesting against this. If I draw your attention to page 122 of the report, you can observe these residents' objections. Indeed, this very council passed a motion in March of this year supporting a resolution that affords our rural villages protection from overdevelopment. I ask committee members to please respect the spirit of our local plan, respect the wishes of the residents of Sherburn St John, protect our strategic gap and reject this application.
Thank you. Questions for the councillor? No, I have none. Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Gaskell, followed by Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you. I was just wondering if officers could explain the strategic gap, if they have a map to show us where it is. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have the map available on screen for you. It's to prevent the coalescence between Sherborne, St John and Basingstoke, and I think it is in it. That's the relevant consideration. It does trigger the policy, but in terms of the policy consideration, it's whether the proposed development would result in the coalescence of the two settlements, and it's officers' view that it does not, because it infills a gap between existing developments as opposed to being within open countryside. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me if I've missed this in what is quite a lengthy report. How many bedrooms are in each of these properties?
It's three-bedroom properties, Chair.
Thank you. Any more questions for officers? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to understand one of the issues that comes up in the flood and drainage area is potential contamination of the chalk aquifer. How close is the chalk aquifer? And I'm sorry, I may have missed this. Are there conditions in the report, okay, for this application that would help contain any potential contamination? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the extent of the below-ground aquifer, I don't have the distance that it is to it exactly. In terms of conditions to prevent the contamination of below ground, condition 18 is a condition in respect of foul sewage. It doesn't extend to surface water drainage, but it could be added to extend to surface water drainage should members so desire.
Thank you. Councillor Gaskell.
Can I ask officers, are there any rules in having septic tanks near wells?
There aren't any relevant planning policies in that respect. The condition 18 sets out the expectations in terms of foul drainage. There's a hierarchy that is expected with all development proposals which is set out by the government, and that's that proposals should first seek to connect to mains drainage, or where that's not feasible, taking into account costs and practicality, the proposal can then be instead to a packaged sewage treatment plant, which is a packaged plant that treats the water and discharges it to an acceptable level. Only then could a septic tank be proposed, which is more of the hole in the ground arrangement. So the condition 18 seeks to secure details and ensure that that hierarchy is considered. Thank you.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take my second question, please. I'm just looking at the rules, reasons for approval. Rule number 2. Okay, you've stated to the committee that the actual planned development is within the strategic gap. Okay, so I'm struggling to understand and want clarification on why you say it would not physically erode the gap, and yet to the committee you said that it will. Thank you.
The policy, the strategic gap policy doesn't restrict all development within the strategic gap. It doesn't create a moratorium on development, full stop. We must consider whether proposals physically erode the gap between Sherborne and St John and the settlement of Basingstoke. And it's officers' advice that as this is an infill plot between two existing developments, that it wouldn't physically erode that gap. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. This might have been a question best directed to one of the previous speakers, but hopefully you can provide some information. It's mentioned in one of the objections there's no footpaths along here. Somebody's mentioned it's a dead-end lane. There's, I think, 5 houses along this road currently. In terms of impact on people's appreciation of the area, who's going along this road on a regular basis, do you know? Does it lead anywhere? Is there a common dog walking route that you're aware of or anything like that? Because if it's just people being aware of something but not actually ever seeing it, then a lot of the objections sort of fall flat for me. So.
Thank you, Chair. The information in terms of the users of the road isn't information that we have available to us in terms of survey work or local information. Thank you.
Councillor Rattigan.
Chair, can I ask officers, the fact that we don't have an up-to-date local plan, does that affect the neighbourhood plan and its weight?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in short, it does. As we don't have a current 5-year supply of housing, any policies within the development plan, so whether that be the local plan or neighbourhood plans that relate to the supply of housing must be considered out of date, and therefore the tilted balance within the MPPF does apply.
Thank you. I see no more hands up, so therefore debate. Councillor Harvey, followed by Councillor Rattigan.
Thanks, Chair. Bearing in mind the arguments that have been made, both in the report and presented this evening, one of the issues I do have is the encroachment into the strategic gap, as has all been debated. When you look at the site and you look at it on a map, there's a strip of development that literally runs between Chinham Lane and Sherborne Road. There is that sense of very isolation to that development because it isn't connected in any way, as has been described, to the actual village itself. In many ways, you could describe it as almost being north of Popley in that re-argument, and I'm sure the residents don't consider that, but in the context of it, that's how it appears. Therefore, these 3 units would be 3 new accesses, because there is no further access, for example, up that road. There's nothing else that's accessed off that road but the existing properties. You are encroaching into the countryside. You are driving towards Sherborne St John. There's no other way you could describe it other than being into the strategic gap. So I get that we've got an issue that the strategic gap policy says you don't have to say that nothing else can be built in the strategic gap. But at the same time, being sat on the meetings that developed the policy in the first place, what was the point of the policy if it wasn't to stop development in the strategic gap? So I get it, and in that sense we've got to decide the balance, haven't we? Does this development actually cause that much harm? The danger is the precedent that it continues to set of the fact that you're crossing a boundary further into the strategic gap. And for me at the moment, I've just got a real problem with that. I can't square that circle at the moment. And I'm coming down on the argument that actually that is harm in my mind.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. As somebody who's going to be supporting the Ashford Hill and Headley neighbourhood plan at next week's council meeting, I think it is important that we realise that residents have taken the time, the trouble and the effort involved in preparing a neighbourhood plan to get it to the best state they can. And although, as was seen in the last application, I am basically in favour of bungalows in a housing mix, I cannot, in all good conscience, support this. This, to me, is a neighbourhood urban creep into a strategic gap. And where do we stop it? Where is the full stop in Sherborne St John? I think we need to sometimes take a breather, understand what we need to do, respect the wishes of a neighbourhood plan, because under SS6 we would like to see brownfield sites developed, previously developed land. There must be opportunities within Sherborne St John to take those chances first and not to concrete over greenfield sites. So I do not believe that the reasons for approval can be supported, and I am happy to move refusal upon the erosion of the strategic gap. The design is not appropriate or sympathetic to the context of the countryside that it is and the lane that it's on, and therefore I can't support it. Thank you.
We have a proposal for approval. Is there a seconder? Sorry, for refusal. Sorry. Is there a seconder? Councillor Frost. Thank you. Councillor Howard Sorrell, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I firmly disagree with what Councillor Harvey has said. I don't think it sets any new precedent. I think it's infilling a gap, like the officers pointed out, between 2 existing properties, so I don't feel like it is actually an encroachment into an area. Even if it were, we take each application on its own merits, and even though we might be uncomfortable that it appears to be encroaching, future applications would be looked at for their own encroachment criteria, as it were, within the area. So I don't think it is a strong reason for refusal. That notwithstanding, I would have moved for approval, but we can't do that now. So,
Thank you. Other than myself, are there any other speakers? Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think Councillor Harvey and Councillor Rattigan have elucidated very clearly the reasons for refusal, and I support that motion. However, I just want to put it on record that I think building near an aquifer, okay, the chalk aquifer, even though we can strengthen the condition 18, okay, I just think is a bit rich. Once the aquifers are contaminated, that's it. It's game over. Okay, we then have a great deal of difficulty removing the contamination. So, you know, I support the motion for refusal, and you know, there we go.
Thank you. Apart from my hand, I don't see any other hands up yet. Councillor Gaskell.
I'd just like to agree with Councillor Harvey. I think this is a deterioration of a gap within the strategic gap. And I just wanted to point out as well, the neighbouring property as a well, if it went to a septic tank or even a packaged equipment, they have a design life of 20 years, I guess. They need regular maintenance. They could leak and cause issues with that well and the chalk aquifer. So I just wanted to highlight that bit all.
Councillor Tomlin, followed by myself.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yes, I'm in complete alliance there with Councillor Rattigan regards the neighbourhood plans. I mean, they are pretty essential, and there's been a lot of work going into it. But I'm reading here in the submissions from the parish council that it said when the neighbourhood plan was being drafted, there were lots of sites being put forward. So I'm not familiar with it exactly, but it implies they did put sites forward in their neighbourhood. And then in our update paper, there's an interesting little thing about the emerging neighbourhood plan for East Woodhay. And a bit at the bottom it says their neighbourhood plan does not include any site allocations, and therefore when adopted would not trigger paragraph 14 of the MPPF, which affords protection against a tilted balance. Well, so therefore, by what I read, is because this has got allocation, it is giving protection against the tilted balance. Or there's some conflict of the information that I'm reading. So I'm just adding to the debate that I think the neighbourhood plan should be upheld, and agree with Councillor Rattigan's argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just clarify the comment around the neighbourhood plan, the comment around the East Woodhay neighbourhood plan later on in the agenda in the update paper. So in respect of that emerging neighbourhood plan, the neighbourhood plan for Sherborne St John did include an allocation, you're quite right, but the protection afforded under paragraph 14 of the MPPF that's referred to only exists for the first 2 years of a neighbourhood plan, and the Sherborne St John neighbourhood plan became live in 2017 and therefore doesn't benefit from that protection afforded by paragraph 14 of the MPPF. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. I find myself agreeing with Councillor Howard Sorrell. We don't have a 5-year housing land supply. We do need houses. We do need bungalows. These are not going to be intrusive in the landscape, and they are, whilst they are within the strategic gap, I don't believe they significantly erode it. If they were out on a limb on their own, wouldn't be saying this, but they're not out on a limb. There are other properties beyond them, so it is an infill site, and the value or the protection afforded by the strategic gap is sadly lessened by lack of a 5-year housing land supply. So, as I say, I find myself agreeing with Councillor Howard Sorrell. I have no other hands up, so It has been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And those against refusal? 3. 4 is it? Okay. That is refused. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can confirm, the application is refused by virtue of the impact that the proposed development would have on the gap between Sherborne, St John and Basingstoke settlements, contrary to policy SSJ2 of the neighbourhood plan and policy EM2 of the local plan, and that the proposed development would not be of an appropriate design and wouldn't relate to surrounding development in a sympathetic manner, impacting harmfully on the countryside, contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework, policy EM10 of the local plan and policy SSJ2 of the Sherborne St John neighbourhood plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. Item 6, land rear of Prospect House, Dixon's Corner. Bethan.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an application for the erection of one detached cottage following demolition of the existing garage. Existing garage on the plot. Other demolition works includes other structures associated with the garage use, which will cease, leaving only the shop with associated office and attached dwelling that fronts Aldermaston Road to remain. The parking for the new dwelling would be served by an existing parking court, which will be reconfigured to provide 2 dedicated spaces for the dwelling. There are a couple of updates on pages 5 to 10 of the agenda. These largely cover conditions added to the application as a result of the Environmental Health Officer's comments, such as contaminated land assessments, soil sampling, and a scheme for dust suppression. Condition 12 has also been changed to include the removal of Class AA under permitted development rights, which is adding additional storey extensions. The update also confirms that the use of the buildings to remain would be a shop together with office and a dwelling, as already stated. It also confirms that 6 parking spaces would remain for these units in the reconfigured parking space. An additional comment was received. These largely were already covered in the office's report, but it did add the point about parking, which I've just clarified, and also concerned the damage to neighbouring foundations, which is a civil matter and not a material planning consideration. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions located at the end of the report on pages 161 to 164 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethan. If we could have our first speaker, Mr Ian Lassiter. Good evening, Mr Lassiter. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't need 4 minutes because I don't intend to make a speech. I commend the officer's report, which is very thorough. The only thing I would say is that we've been working on this site in conjunction with your officers for a couple of years now, including Daniel Eyre, and he was very supportive of the scheme that you see before you now. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions for Mr Lassiter? No? That was easy, wasn't it? Thank you. Councillor McIntyre. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Mr Chair, councillors. I believe if there was loyalty points for committee meetings, I'm halfway to a hotel room by now, I think. You're going to have to excuse me, please. Residents asked me to speak to this over the weekend, so I'm a bit light on material for it. The arguments are similar to Hilltop, really, in the fact that the application site again sits within the strategic gap. I just want to address some points that were made about the strategic gap, and especially the point about infilling. I want to thank the councillors for observing the importance of the strategic gap. And at what point does infilling stretch on to actually building out? I think it's quite hard to make a distinction between the two. So I just want to make that point. The application site is sited on the boundary of the Sherborne St John Conservation Area. Residents have impressed upon the point, if allowed to go ahead, it would have a negative impact on character setting and views into this conservation area. I know the site in question, and it leads up to a right-of-way that is heavily used by residents out walking their dogs. The vehicular access opposite Dixon's site is a particular concern to residents. They see this being a huge impact on access, you can see up there. And they're asking whether considering has there been no allowance for parking made within the application, and what impact will this have on an already congested small lane. Surrounding properties are of a considerable age and grade 2 listed properties of interest. Residents say the design and scope of the application is not in keeping with many existing properties and immediate proximity and breach of SS5. Again, residents have expressed to me in particular concerns regarding the structural integrity of listed properties because they're made of chalk composites which are incredibly vulnerable to the ground vibrations from construction and the movement of these heavy vehicles. Much for the grounds that were made for Hilltop, I ask committee members to respect the spirit of a strategic gap, respect the wishes of our residents. The neighbourhood plan, whilst being made in 2017, had a site allocation of 15 homes for Sherburn St John. Sherburn St John actually built 20 homes off that, so they overdeveloped as part of that neighbourhood plan. So again, please protect the strategic gap, and residents have asked me to express my concerns on this and to reject this application.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor McIntyre? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? No? In that case, debate. If there's Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. This was definitely a site that benefited from a viewing panel. The bottom line, from my point of view, is I think it's quite a modest house, and it's removing and tidying up an area, as you've seen in these photos, which I would say would make access actually easier, given the modest size of the house. So I have no problem in proposing we accept the officer's report as stated on the paper.
Thank you. I have a proposal. Councillor Konechko.
Yeah, I was just going to address the point about the strategic gap. I think in the previous application, I think there was some debate as to whether it was infill, whether it was respecting the ethos and the spirit of the strategic gap. I think in this case, it's more difficult to make that argument because of the nature of the existing site. So I think, like Councillor Tomlin, I'm minded to agree with the officer recommendation on this.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is a typical SS6, previously developed land, frankly, and we should have no objections to. I think this would improve the site. It was a mess, let's just be honest about it. And as for the vehicle access, well, there's a number of houses down that lane, and they can have as many cars as they want for the children and visitors. So I am happy to second Councillor Tomlin's movement.
Thank you. Were there any other hands up? I didn't see. No? In that case, it's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? Yeah, full set. Thank you. That is approved. Officer.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is approved as per subject to conditions listed on pages 161 to 164 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 7, Highfield View, Frog Lane, Maple Durwell. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a short written update, which is to confirm the details of the viewing panel that were held at the site. There is also a verbal update to this application. As per page 174 of the agenda, the site is in the built-up area as defined by the courts, and as per page 175 of the agenda paper, it's not isolated The site is not, however, brownfield land, given that gardens and built-up areas are excluded from the definition within the NPPF. The proposal doesn't, therefore, accord with policy SS6 of the local plan, but given the lack of 5-year supply, it does comply with the NPPF, as it doesn't result in an isolated dwelling, and the recommendation, therefore, remains unchanged. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. And if we could have our speaker, Mr. Partridge, please. No, we don't have Mr. Partridge. Okay, in that case, I think you. Sorry? No speakers. Questions to officers? No? Debate? In that case, Councillor Howard Sorrell. No, go on.
Thank you, Chair. One of the public observations said that it was identical to a previous application that was refused. Is there any merit to that argument, and should we be, well, not bound, but at least led by a previous decision for refusal?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The previous application was very similar to the current proposal. It was an application that was refused in 2013, and I can give you a brief summary of the main differences between the position in 2013 and their position now. So first, obviously, is the passing of the 9 years and the degradation of the site as well. There's also been a significant change in policy at national and local level. So there is the adoption of a new local plan and 2 versions of the NPPF as well. There's also, very significantly, the lack of 5-year housing land supply position, which wasn't the position previously in 2013. There's another approval recently by this committee as well, which is about 115 metres to the southwest, which reached similar conclusions to the conclusion here in terms of the impact and ultimately approving that. And then in 2013 as well, the scheme didn't benefit from any comments from Historic Environment team, so didn't have any expert advice from the Historic Environment team. However, this current application has had that assessment from them, with them providing no objection. So quite a few changes from the position in 2013 to the current position. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. Debate. In that case, I will move the officer recommendation from the chair. Seconded, Councillor Howard Sorrell. Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? Yeah, that's everybody. Thank you. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. To confirm that application is approved in accordance with the officer recommendation in the order paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Our last application tonight, number 8, land north of Slade Hill, Wilson Hill. Bethan.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a application for permission in principle for 2 dwellings at land north of Slade Hill. An indicative site plan has been provided, which shows 2 dwellings to be arranged on spacious plots. There is an update on pages 10 to 11 of the update paper, acknowledging that the independent examiner for the emerging East Woodhay neighbourhood plan has recommended that it meets the basic conditions and should be moved to a referendum. As it's not yet adopted, the weight of it is not full weight, as it is not yet part of the development plan. The local plan remains the most relevant development document for the area. The updated progress position of the neighbourhood plan does not change the conclusions of the assessments within the officer report, including in respect of the principle of development or landscape impact referenced. And as noted previously, there's no site allocations, so paragraph 11 is still engaged. The application is recommended for approval, and there are a list of requirements expected to be submitted within the technical details consent located at the end of the report on pages 203 to 204 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethan. If we can have our first speakers, Mr. King and Mr. Everly. You have 4 minutes between you. How you use that is entirely up to you. And the microphone buttons are in front of you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. The location lies outside the settlement policy boundary and is within an area of outstanding natural beauty. These alone are clear reasons for refusal. Moreover, whilst the term sustainable is used often in the planning statement, the sustainability of future generations required by the National Policy Planning Framework don't appear to me to be included. I arranged an ecological appraisal in March 22 on a building 435 metres from the proposed site prior to roof repair works. The chartered environmentalist wrote, during the survey, species of conservation concern noted on site were stock dove, wren, song thrush and dunnock, which are amber listed as a result of national population declines. And the Schedule 1 firecrest was observed in relation to the boundary holly and appeared to be holding territory overlapping in nearby trees. The presence of these birds under 500 metres away, as well as National Trust woodland 125 metres away and our Spinney 40 metres away, make this a poor countryside location to grant permission. An application 20 metres away at Slade Hill Cottage, inside the settlement policy boundary, for the erection of one 4-bed dwelling and garaging was refused by the council on 8 December 20, citing, amongst other things, sustainability and close proximity to a number of trees. Given this refusal, it would seem anomalous and perplexing to now approve 2 dwellings over the road, outside the settlement policy boundary, in an area of outstanding natural beauty. The land's agricultural use for growing grasses, which are of an amazing variety, and for grazing horses, is the best and most sustainable use of this location. For all these clear reasons, I ask the committee to refuse this application.
In addition to what Mr. Everly has said, I have tried very hard to understand the MPPF policy document. If you look at the document you've got in front of you, page 189 says the proposal does meet those requirements. On page 191, it says it does not reach those requirements. So I am confused. There is a letter of objection from Mr. Johnson that goes into a great deal of detail, citing paragraph numbers, subsections, etc., which when I read in isolation, not being a planning officer myself, makes perfect sense as to why this application should be rejected. If one looks at the consultants...
You have 1 minute remaining.
Okay. If one looks at the consultant's report, the landscape report does indeed put out a series of points which lead it to conclude that it should be objected to. But they do reference a site that was approved, and I looked at that site and it's in Hollington Lane. Now, Hollington Lane can't be any further away from Station Road, if you could possibly get there, and still be in the confines of Wharton Hill. So I don't think that is relevant. The last thing I'd like to say is that Mr. Simon Bound was on BBC South Today not more than a month ago, saying that this Borough Council has had more development than it needs to, and it's time to put the brakes on, his words, in order for the infrastructure to catch up. That is also true of Wharton Hill. In fact, it's the sewage
Can I ask you to wind up, please?
The sewage infrastructure that is the most important, because Thames Water have been fined tens of thousands of pounds for leaking sewage into the local water supply. One such question 2 years ago ended with the Chase being closed for 18 months while contamination was cleared up. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Questions for the speakers? No? Thank you very much, gentlemen. If you could turn your microphone off as you leave, that would be good. And Mr. Pettit, please. Good evening, Mr. Pettit. You have 4 minutes. I will remind you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mark Pettit. I've prepared and submitted this planning application on behalf of the applicant. The application is recommended for approval, and we fully support this recommendation. As outlined in the committee report, this application is seeking permission in principle for up to 2 dwellings on land to the north of Slade Hill in the settlement of Wootton Hill. The design components of the scheme, such as the scale, appearance and layout of the houses, are matters that would be considered at technical detail consent stage, as are matters such as ecology and drainage. The scope of this current application is therefore limited to the location, the use and the amount of development. Whilst the site falls within the open countryside, it's a stone's throw away from the settlement policy boundary for Wootton Hill, and the council accept that they cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. This means that those development plan policies that relate to housing delivery, such as SS6, are out of date. So just because a site such as this one is outside a settlement policy boundary doesn't necessarily mean that the principle of residential development is unacceptable. Indeed, permission in principle was granted at appeal for up to 4 dwellings on land of Hollington Lane at the southern end of the village back in October 2020. So having regard to the presumption in favour of sustainable development, there are no policies in the framework that provide a clear reason for refusing permission in principle in this instance. The site does not fall within a conservation area and is a generous distance away from the nearest listed building. Furthermore, it sits within flood zone 1, where the risk of flooding is very low. With regards to landscape designations, whilst the application site does fall within the A and B, 2 dwellings would represent a very small expansion to the built environment of Wootton Hill. The site is well screened and well related to a number of existing dwellings in the village, and with additional soft landscaping put forward at technical detail consent stage, there's no reason why 2 dwellings cannot sit comfortably in this location. Furthermore, it's noteworthy that the council's landscape team acknowledged that it would be difficult to refuse this application on landscape grounds, given the recent planning appeals in the Wootton Hill area. It's also worth noting that neither Highways, Environmental Health or Ecology have raised any objection to the proposals. In terms of whether the site is isolated or not, we agree wholeheartedly with the planning officer's position. This is clearly not a site that is physically remote, being well related to the built-up area of Wootton Hill, with residential development seen immediately to the south and west. Slade Hill Cottage, which stands directly opposite the site, outside the settlement policy boundary, was the subject of an application for a single dwelling back in 2020. In that instance, the council was satisfied that the site was not isolated, and the parish council had no intrinsic objection to the site being developed. With this in mind, the application site is a natural and logical site for 2 additional dwellings in a location where it would follow the established pattern and grain of development in this part of the village. So in summary, the site is considered to be an appropriate location for 2 dwellings. The council concede that they cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. Obviously, that's a situation that could become worse with the existing nitrate issue in the borough. In this respect,
have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. In this respect, the proposed development would make a small but worthwhile and measurable contribution to the situation on a site that is not within a conservation area or a flood risk zone, and where there are realistic alternatives to using a private car. Furthermore, as the proposed dwellings would not be isolated, the location wholly accords with the National Planning Policy Framework that seeks to promote sustainable development in rural areas by encouraging homes to be located where it will enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. At technical detail consent stage, every effort will be made to ensure that the new houses are sensitively designed, make a positive contribution to the village and do not compromise the character and appearance of this part of the parish. In short, the proposals do not fall down against the presumption, as the adverse impacts do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. We therefore respectfully request that permission in principle be granted accordingly, in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Pettit? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Faulkner, followed by Councillor Frost.
Thank you. On page 189.1, it says basically this decision is based upon the lack of a 5-year land supply. But I've got one email, and the Principal Landscape and Planning Officer of the North Wessex Downs AONB has made it very clear that the 5-year land supply issue does not apply to the AONB. So can I ask who is right on that one? Are we right or are they right?
Paragraph 11 of the NPPF advises that we can only refuse applications if the impact to sensitive areas provides a clear reason for refusing the application. And in this instance, it's the advice that the proposal isn't of harm to the AONB, so it doesn't provide a clear reason for refusing the application. If you have a site that does provide harm to the AONB, then you would say that it does provide a clear reason for refusal, and therefore the tilted balance would not apply. But in this case, there isn't a clear reason for refusal in officers' view because the proposal is considered acceptable in terms of the landscape impact, and therefore tilted balance is applied. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting to hear Greg's comments there. There is mention of an emerging local plan, okay, for Eastwood here, and sorry, neighbourhood plan. I beg your pardon. Okay, and I would just like to know: is this site in that emerging neighbourhood plan?
Yes, it is within the parish, so it's within the area covered within the neighbourhood plan, yes. But there are no site allocations, if that's what you mean, in the neighbourhood plan. Thank you.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect I know the answer, but within AONB definitions, is there any provision given towards biodiversity? Because we've heard some evidence from one of the speakers tonight about amber category species of birds that are located within proximity of this site. So I'm wondering if potentially we can move for refusal based on risk to those species as they contribute towards the AONB.
This is an application for permission in principle, so the biodiversity officer has confirmed no objections subject to technical details consent. At that stage, when it's further investigated, the grounds for refusal could be drawn then, but at this stage, there's no grounds for, well, there's no reason given from our professional expert in-house that there would be adverse justification to refuse it on that basis in terms of location, land use and scale of development. Thank you.
Any more questions to officers? No? In that case, debate. Councillor Konechko, followed by Councillor Harvey. We'll catch the rest later.
Thank you, Chair. One of the arguments we've heard this evening is that, yes, this site is within the AONB, but it's just a very small site, so we shouldn't be too concerned. And I really struggle with that, because I think if we keep applying that argument to this application and subsequent applications, then eventually the AONB will disappear, because all of these little small slices will eventually add up to a very large chunk. So I find that argument difficult to accept, and that, to me, that everything else starts to hinge on that. So my initial feeling on this is that it's very difficult to support, because it might be a small chunk of the AONB, but it's still part of the AONB that we're going to lose as a result of this.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Harvey, Councillor Frost and myself, and Councillor Howard Sorrell. So, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up where colleagues have just left off. Page 193 says on the landscape officer's opinion that they object. Because it's noted, and this is where it really winds you up about the current planning system, it's noted that it could be difficult to refuse the PIP application given the recent planning appeals in the Walton Hill area. Despite the proposed development creating an impact on the landscape character of this area, changing the rural landscape character to one of domestic influence. So we have a clear landscape statement, and it's because of the situation that there's a rollover. Now, does it damage the landscape? Yes. Is there harm? Yes. Is it the AONB? Yes, the AONB officer has been clear on that themselves. Do we respect the AONB officer or not is an important part of the decision, I think, that we need to weigh up. I am particularly angry tonight to learn that the executive of the council has rolled over on this nitrates issue to basically allowing credits to be bought by developers in Eastleigh, when what we actually want is local solutions to nitrate issues, not that they can go off and buy an offset somewhere else in Hampshire. Now, I get that, and that's an executive decision, and they've made it, and now we're saddled with that decision. So I understand that. That aside, if I've understood it correctly this evening, then I stand to be corrected. On the basis of the landscape issue, I just think if we don't protect the AONB, then what are we not here to do? We have to protect the AONB. And on this occasion, I think it does cross the line because there is a landscape issue and it's a PIP. So in principle is the issue. Once we cross this line, we're saying development can happen on this site. It then goes into the technical debate. That's why I hate PIPs anyway. But you're going to a situation where if we accept the principle of development, we can't then undo that, no matter how much damage is then done to the landscape of the AONB itself. So in principle, do I object to this as damage to the AONB? I do, and I say there's harm, and I would move a refusal on that basis.
Thank you. It's been moved for refusal. Is there a seconder? Plenty. Councillor Bowes. Thank you. Councillor Frost, I think you're next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I suppose I'm finding myself having to agree with Councillor Harvey yet again. Okay, I hate these PIPs. Okay, because I think the barrier to approval is so low on them. Okay, the fact is that in this particular report we've got one reason for approval, and that's that we don't have a 5-year land supply. Okay, I find it quite objectionable that we're having to make a decision and potentially approve a PIP going forward, only to then not be able to, unapprove it when we come to the actual technical details, because effectively, once we've approved this tonight, okay, the technical details and the design comes forward, and we then can't unapprove it. It's very, very difficult to refuse it. So I really struggle with this, and I struggle generally with PIPs myself. I really don't know which motion to support. I haven't really made my mind up, okay, but I just don't like PIPs per se, and I think this one is a particularly awkward one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. I'm next on the list, and strangely the paragraph I was going to refer to is the same one that Councillor Harvey's referred to, which is the landscape issue on page 193. And every building has a landscape issue somewhere. The question isn't whether it has a landscape issue. The question is whether that landscape issue is detrimental enough to warrant refusal. And it's interesting the wording that's actually here, creating an impact on landscape character. But that's, could go either way. And then it goes on to say changing the rural landscape from one to a domestic influence. That, to my mind, is where it becomes unacceptable. You haven't just changed the area, you changed it from rural to domestic. So everything else I was going to say, I think was said by Councillor Harvey. I've got Councillor Howard Sorrell, followed by Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harvey's covered basically what I wanted to say, but more eloquently than I probably would have said it. So I guess I'm happy to move on to Councillor Rattigan's points.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. In basic terms, I have no objection to some development in an AONB. I think sometimes it helps areas and maintains the vibrancy of the rural communities. In this case, it does not. It's the change of character, I think, is the issue at hand here. And as I've stated throughout this meeting, I am not supportive of greenfield development outside the settlement boundary. However close it is, or the proximity, or maybe it's only the level of a street, I just feel it is not acceptable. And therefore, I don't like PIPs as a basic tenant. They don't give us enough information to build on. It is a regressive step from this government in terms of the planning process. And if I can alter that in any way, I will continue to campaign to change the PIP process. But as it stands at the moment, I cannot be supportive of this application, and I'm happy with Councillor Harvey's recommendation for refusal.
I haven't got any more hands up. Councillor Harvey, can you clarify your reasons for refusal?
On the landscape impact, effectively AONB.
Thank you. Moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? Yeah, that's everybody. Sorry. And those against refusal? Councillor Howard-Sorrell, are you abstaining on it? You're abstaining. Thank you. That is refused. Bethan.
Okay. Thank you. So the application is refused due to landscape impact and on the AONB, and that's contrary to section 15 of the MPPF and policies EM1 and EM10 of the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That is the last of the applications. We're now moving on to the pink papers, for which we need to go into private session. So, we do need to clear the room of everybody who is not part of the committee.
Need to take the vote to move into private session.
First. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And we need to move into private session, so I need a proposer for that. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Frost. Thank you. Right, I've got to read this out. That pursuant to section 100 brackets A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting on the ground that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing it, and therefore that exempt information is likely to be disclosed as defined in the appropriate paragraph of Schedule 12A of the Act.